So we're the last.
Yes, as a side note, we've got a bunch of other people who filtered in. We have more seats up front, so if the people who just entered can grab a seat, we'll make room for you here, and we can crowd everybody in. Thanks.
So we're the last panel before, we're the last thing standing between you and drinks.
Yes, that's always a dangerous spot.
It's a dangerous spot, but we've heard from a lot of great panels today about where technology is going. Now we're going to hear from our hosts, Craig, Ben, and Tom. You have very strong points of view about where things are going, where the opportunities for disruption are. So we're going to peer into, or you're going to help us peer into the future and see what's going to be transformational. So,
all right, we'll give it a shot.
Let's start where we left off, which was AI. What do you guys think? Where are the opportunities for AI in the enterprise, and how does it look like?
Yeah, and maybe I'll jump in on there. First of all, I think that was a fantastic panel with a lot of great points of view. I'd say that some areas where we agree is as follows: is we believe also algorithms, everyone's got them. Now it's not necessarily easy to build, but that's not going to be your competitive advantage. We really believe that the competitive advantage is really in that proprietary data. Parsing a little bit further, because we're enterprise investors, we really think that understanding and having and hoarding that data, making sure it's clean, making sure it's labeled, and making sure you have tens of millions of either images, images of, say, for instance, your hearts, your lungs, having tens of millions of signals of fraud will be able to be the exact goal that will help you create that next artificial intelligence system that really matters. So, what does this actually mean if you fast forward 2 to 3 years from now? This is going to be an arms race. Google doesn't have all the information, Microsoft doesn't have all the information, Apple doesn't have all the information. The most important information is not even recorded yet. They're going to be recorded in the future because we're doing that today with all of the new data sets that we're forming out there. So that's at least one view that we have of how value is going to be created in AI.
I think this is an important thing when people say, oh, well, the big platforms like Google, the Amazon will own artificial intelligence. They don't have the data. You have the data in your business, whatever you're doing. If you look deeply into what you've been understanding through the lens of BI tools or big data, whatever you have existing inside of your enterprise, start there and take a look and see, well, what is unique to me? What do I have that no one else knows? That's a good starting point to see what your strategy ought to be in using artificial intelligence. And I think,
go ahead.
And I think too, we were talking on the AI panel about AI being an ingredient in software, almost like internet connectivity. And I think in the future, what we think today of is SaaS, it's going to change where all software is going to be, including these elements of automation. I believe someday software should write itself. I mean, we're still terrible at writing software. It's full of bugs. It's full of security holes. It doesn't always do what it's supposed to do. Computers should be writing their own software. I think ultimately artificial intelligence should be ways of automating the development of software itself. And software as a service will become just a way you turn on, you say, I wanted to do this, and it does it.
Yeah. So when you polled the audience in the last panel, not everybody raised their hand saying they're going to be using AI. I think you want to encourage all your companies and customers to jump in. Why?
Well, a couple of thoughts. First off, I think companies that are fundraising, about 100% of them are using AI, at least in their messaging. In reality, not that many people are integrating it yet. But it is interesting. We think AI, machine learning, as you define some of these broader terms, is one of those forcing functions that will infiltrate the next wave of disruption in a variety of these industries. So Tom was mentioning SaaS. That's an interesting area where SaaS itself has disrupted the incumbent on-premise software companies over the last 10 years. Now there's potentially a next wave of SaaS disrupting SaaS, where the cloud is table stakes for that minute. Now, how do you gain an edge in that area? Are there components of machine learning where your software isn't the same as when you buy it on day one? It gets better over time. It learns and adapts, and that may make it more predictive or more insightful. It may augment human intelligence, or it may surpass insights that humans are able to get. And maybe that's an extra edge in how your customer service situation develops, or sales analytics develops, or cybersecurity and fraud detection develops.
So in the last panel, somebody said if you're not using some form of AI or of ML, you'll be dead. You won't have a future. Do you see it that way? And if you have a startup on your portfolio, you're telling them, so what's your AI plan, your AI strategy? Are we going into a world of haves and have-nots, and you're have-not, you're out of luck?
I mean, I'd say that to be determined if everything needs to have AI. Does your watch need to have AI? Does your shoes need to have AI? Does your car need to have AI? Just to make an extreme example. I'd say this, for those businesses and those enterprise software platforms that actually can have a competitive advantage with AI, which I think it will be very broad, you've got to be able to do it now. You have to do it now. Collecting your data sets, understanding algorithms. I think as Jensen, I actually mentioned it from before, is just anything that has a data element or has some sort of intelligence or inference or predictiveness. If you match any of those keywords and those are in your checkboxes, you better be using it right now. Because if you're not, you're going to wake up one day and your competitor is going to have it. They're already going to have the data set that you don't have, and that arms race is over. I think that what Craig mentioned and what was mentioned previously too is something we look for as well. Whether you call it a learning loop, Andrew Ng calls it a positive feedback loop. We call it a continuous learning loop or a continuous increase in value over time. So is your program getting smarter and smarter every single day, every piece of data that you give it? Or is it just topping out? Is it only getting, you only hit 20% goodness, but you can't go beyond that? If your AI software is not getting better and better, you're going to get surpassed eventually in the future. So that's our view on what we're looking for.
Yeah, but I think you got to get specific too. So there's lots of things that are going to generally get better for you if you use more data and think about these learning loops. But I'd say start with something specific. And we talked in the last panel about some applications you can use today in a very specific way, like around HR or sales. Start with that, because another challenge is your culture, your company has to get used to using something that's not deterministic. It might change over time. You've got to interact with it. The same way when you interact with Alexa or Siri, the more you do that, the better it gets, the better it can understand and start to respond to you. Like that mentality is going to continue in the enterprise. Where using your CRM system, it's not just like you get trained, you have the cheat sheet and you do it. It's going to be a relationship with your CRM system. So that's kind of how it's going to change inside of the enterprise as well.
So I hear a certain amount of consensus that it's going to be transformational, yet I haven't heard the examples that knock my socks off, that are like, oh, wow, we're going to be able to do this. What do you think give us some examples of where applications might be really transformative?
Sure. I mean, I think some companies that we're seeing, or some things that you can believe, particularly the enterprises, and some companies are approaching this, but some examples would include, why isn't your antivirus actually getting smarter and smarter without humans? How come you still need signatures behind it? Another example is, how come fraud detection isn't getting better and better? Some companies are going after this. At some point, the machines will be able to just understand all the signals that we can't even fathom that would tell us whether something's fraudulent or not. I think that what we'd like to see, or, and it's a little bit of an opportunity, but also a risk, is what happens if you create an AI piece of software that is just as good as a radiologist, and then what happens when it's 10 times better than your average radiologist or your pathologist? I think these are things where you can feel are very tangible and could happen, even though there might be years between now and them reaching those two milestones. I think those are just some examples.
The radiologist example made me think of another question, which is, as investors, do you favor the vertical or the platform type companies?
At this point, we're looking for things that have a clear business outcome. Generally speaking, I think those have been vertically oriented. There are some horizontal platforms, but I think if you can show that a learning loop can improve performance over time, and that's going to result in some kind of ROI, that's a very investable business today. And I think that's where we also look at things like the Internet of Things, which is taking things that are in the real world and starting to automate them with AI, and that can increase efficiency or utilization, and that can be tied to an ROI. So that's another place we see AI impacting a business case in the physical world.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to depend a lot depending on what the specific application is. So I think there's some danger of companies just trying to fit in or bolt on some component of AI to what they're already doing. And it doesn't work. It's like the prior iteration of on-prem software companies just porting everything to the cloud so they can call themselves SaaS. And it doesn't work unless it's natively built for that purpose. So you'll see some companies where a horizontal application makes perfect sense. Customer service is a good example. Customer analytics, cybersecurity, fingerprinting. Other areas where it's going to be much more of a vertical application, healthcare, image diagnostics, recognizing skin cancer or breast cancer, as well as a trained doctor. These are applications that are hitting now. You've got machine learning that has reached parity with some of these trained physicians. That's a very interesting paradigm that you start to hit now, where at the very least, you could have an aid for doctors that gives them a second opinion on whether or not a particular spot looks like skin cancer. But think about how transformational that could be for remote areas or developing countries where you don't have a trained doctor looking at some of these areas, and you could actually send in an image via mobile phone and get a result that maybe says 70% chance you should go, it's worth traveling to go see somebody about this thing, or better health and diagnostics, tracking, and then patient follow-up. So those things you're starting to hit now. It's a matter of actually just applying it to the specific right use case and not just trying to bolt on AI.
So one final AI question. When you're talking to portfolio companies, does the conversation come up about, are you building to a tool or a service to do a job or to help me do a job, which we talked a little bit about in the prior panel?
I think the first steps have been helping make a human's job go more smoothly or go more quickly. So that's the first examples I've seen. We're investors in a company called Airware, which is an enterprise drone company. So they're taking pictures of roofs of buildings with drones for insurance underwriting purposes. So part of that is helping the insurance underwriter be able to do their job more quickly and safely with the drone doing the flying and picturing rather than them climbing. But the second step is automating the analysis. And so that's where things like AI can come into play.
So there's AI. What happens to big data in a world where AI rules? Is big data still a thing? Has it peaked?
Yeah, I think our view behind it is big data still is a thing. We focus on enterprise big data. It's a thing. It's peaked, and actually, if anything, it's troughed at this point. Why we think that is, well, just first of all, categorically speaking, when we say enterprise big data, because big data means a lot of things to a lot of different people, we think of it as the new databases, data warehouses, and analytics product that kind of sprung up in the last 5-6 years. These are the folks like the Hadoop's, Tableaus of the world, as well as Hortonworks and Splunk. Now, all of these companies grew up very, very quickly. They seem to have a lot of hopes and dreams by the market to actually say, look, these are going to take over the entire market. Oracle, throw them away. Microsoft database, throw them away. All of these new companies are going to win. But as the market fell in love with these companies, and then they fell out of love. I mean, you can see Hortonworks and Tableau down 60, 70% from their peaks. We think the market is wrong. And why we think the market is wrong is as follows, is because these companies actually have true fundamentals. The growth and their technology are very, very solid, where they're going to keep growing 30, 40, 50% for the next 5 or 10 years. If you compound that out, they will take over the market. So we think right now it's an amazing time. If you bet behind the right fundamental winners, you can make millions of dollars. So those companies that are in that space of enterprise big data, they're going to come out of that trough of disillusionment and make a big comeback.
Do you think the cloud providers, the Amazons of the world, are a threat to that?
That's a good, very, very good question here. I mean, when you think enterprise software, do you think Oracle? Do you think Microsoft? Do you think SAP? You do. Do you think Amazon? Maybe. Maybe. I think people say cloud computing, cloud computing. We've been hearing it forever. But we actually think, if you're in the big data space, you got to be scared of Amazon. And why you got to be scared of Amazon is in the last couple years, they came from nowhere to becoming a scary, scary player in the enterprise software space, but also in the big data space. What you're actually seeing here is Amazon on their cloud service, they've actually built a big data service on top of that, where they're going to try to commoditize the data management and analytics space, just like what they tried to do for brick and mortar retail stores. So, some of you may know these facts, but some of the recent traction with Amazon is the cloud business of Amazon, excluding retail, it's a $14 billion business. $14 billion that's growing 47% year on year. That is a big monster. And what you might not know, though, is customers migrated 18,000 databases into the cloud. 18,000. Somebody's losing there. So if you actually, on this trajectory, Amazon may be one of the biggest or the biggest big data companies in the space in the next 2 or 3 years.
Why just Amazon? Why not Microsoft and Google as cloud providers?
Well, I think Amazon, they've been doing this for quite some time. They've got a lot of what they call data gravity. Everyone uses Amazon, not only startups, but also corporations. So they've already got it in the Amazon bucket. I think we would all love to see Oracle, Microsoft, Google make a run for the money. But right now, $14 billion still growing at that incredible clip is really hard to compete with. But, I think Albert was up here and he talked a little bit about how Diane Green is going to head that up. And she did some phenomenal things with VMware and EMC. So we're really excited to see what the next chapter holds.
It's not just Amazon's basic database capability. They're layering on additional services such as AI. So they have a number of things that allow you to do similar to what Alexa does and build your own version. And that's something that we think is going to continue to layer up. Yeah. So Amazon will be impacting the business layer and disrupting even more companies up the enterprise stack.
We were talking last week about some of these trends, and I think you mentioned full stack big data company as an opportunity and a trend that's coming. What does that mean?
Well, our thinking is as follows: is if you look at where the points of innovation were over the last 5-6 years in enterprise big data, it was around creating a lot of that plumbing, like the Hadoops of the world is kind of replatforming the data warehouse. You also had NoSQL, like DataStax, taking over big chunks of the Oracle SQL market. And you saw entirely new companies like a Tableau and Datameer, who's in our portfolio, that are actually creating the new analytics stack. We think, in general, those wars have been won. You're going to be choosing these frameworks that have already been put in place. These are the building blocks that you will go on top of. So where's the next point of enterprise big data innovation? We think it's in the apps. But being an app by itself isn't sufficient. That app has to be able to own and manage all of those different stacks those building blocks that we kind of mentioned. And we think that that's where the innovation is going to happen. A company will have to know, new innovative companies will be a full stack. I don't need to touch Hadoop. I don't need to touch any analytics. I get the entire service, and it can manage terabytes or petabytes of data underneath.
And the implication of that is, with the app layer, is you have big data that's going to be in the daily or even real-time operational loop. So if you're using an enterprise piece of software, then the information that's driving how it's going to engage with a customer or optimize your shopping cart or present you with a customized experience, that's going to be using gigabytes or terabytes of data about people like you and what you've done in the past and what channel you're coming in through on a mobile phone or a website. All that's going to be processed in a split second and applied and optimized to get you to buy more or engage more. So that's what's going to happen on the consumer side.
Unification, of all the data.
So one of the sources where all this data is coming from is from all these sensors and devices and things that are out there with some intelligence that we call the IoT. When you think about IoT, where do you think the spoils are to be gotten?
Yeah, I think we've been moving toward an inflection point in IoT in the last few years. So, first chapter was laying the sensor networks. The second chapter was getting the data into one place with big data. The third chapter is now building intelligence on top of that, doing something that matters to a business. So we see it as a vertical-oriented approach. And what's starting to happen first is wherever there are sensor networks, and they're all around us, that's where you see business value being created. That's where the first profits of the IoT are going. So for example, the utility industry has been laying smart energy meters all around the world for years now. So finally, there's startups that are taking that data and being able to understand how a building's using electricity and helping it to be more efficient. And that can create billions of dollars of energy savings. So that's an example where we see a real business today. And in fact, these startups didn't pay for those sensors to be laid out, but they're getting the benefit of them.
Every era of computing, you know, from mainframe to client server and so forth, has had its own architecture. Do we have the architecture in place to deal with the mass number of devices of, you know, orders of magnitude greater? And if not, where are the opportunities in building that computing infrastructure?
Yeah, I think IoT is really driving a replatforming of billions of dollars of the big data layer. Now you've got a new kind of data, and that's why it's driving change in the platform and systems. IoT data is higher velocity, so it's real time from sensors in the real world, like what's happening on the Golden Gate Bridge, or what's happening in your Tesla, or Nissan Leaf. And you're taking that data, and it's a lot of variety as well. It's from different sources. It's dirty data sometimes, or sporadic. And then it's just incredible amounts of volume where you're trying to process this. So the kinds of databases, the kinds of algorithms to make sense of that data are being impacted. And that's where we see a lot of different applications that are kind of at the lower end of the stack and helping to get that data into a place where we can really see it in a clean way.
Yeah, I mean, just a comment on that is it seems like it's re-platforming because if you think about it, you know, over time, all of the servers got beefier and beefier, even though we've made them smaller and smaller, but they're all running Windows, they're all running Linux. But when you think about, you know, even this device, you know, this thing can't run Windows 10 on it.
That's some weird Fitbit from China. I don't know where you got that. I don't know what it's recording.
BeFit.
But
it's exactly that. It's like, you know, because you need low power, you need to have certain types of sensors that are out there that are pulling in different types of data. You need an entire replatforming of the actual stack of how do you store data, how do you collect data, how do you transmit data, how do you network all the data.
Yeah, and a lot of that work still has to be done. You've got some of those capabilities now with the big data stuff that Ben was talking about. Another key area that hasn't been done that needs to be addressed as you get the proliferation of IoT is the security side. Because now you've got this whole broader spectrum of essentially a very large and distributed attack surface on a scale that you hadn't thought about before. So we've seen this recently with some attacks where very mundane household electronic items were used in DDoS. And this type of attack awakens us to the fact that all of these digital devices need to be secured, need to be hardened. It's just not an approach that's been taken before. One, you've got to have that initial level and awareness to do security. Okay, well, how do you do it for these particular devices? But then now you've got an entirely new paradigm for being able to assess that amount of data, recognize attacks, be able to guard against those attacks, because that attack surface has certainly gotten more complex. We haven't solved it.
This is a high-stakes game, by the way. I mean, if you're in a self-driving car, if someone hacks your car, they can kill you with your driving car here.
Yeah.
So this is not like a light issue. This isn't something that people are talking about openly, but I can tell you inside of the corporations we work with, IoT security is a top priority, and I think it's just a matter of time until you see headlines on the newspaper of something that went wrong.
Yeah. And it's a very different approach, too, because, you know, I was talking with the CISO of one of the large auto manufacturers as part of our corporate program, and he points out that you can't use the same type of detection and remediation measures, patching update measures that you use for your PC when you've got a car. It has to be able to respond in very real time. It has to be hardened to an entirely different level when you've got the ability for the cars themselves to be digitally connected, and then cars to be communicating with other cars, and then potentially autonomous vehicles. So the attack surface is definitely brought in, and we haven't even solved the server and laptop side.
So if you've got a startup that's building a product or a service in this area, you tell them they need to prioritize this, but they've also still got something they want to achieve that they need. How do you balance those two? The main functionality you want to provide, and then security, and how do you mesh the two together?
I think if you're going after an enterprise-ready product that wants to sell to these large enterprises, you've got to start with the assumption of security and building that in from the beginning.
But if you take that assumption, if you say, okay, if something happens to my security, I'm dead.
Yeah.
Then there's no limit to the amount of investment you could put in to secure yourself. So when is enough?
True. True, but you have to be able to go into that CIO, CTO, or CISO of some large customer that you want to sell your software package to, and be able to demonstrate or validate that it's secure enough on that relative balance scale that they can take trust in it. And it was the same prospect for SaaS companies, being able to show that, don't worry, your data is going to be secure in the cloud. Was it 100% secure? No, and there were still attacks that existed. But they were able to get to the point where you got this crossover that it wasn't necessarily less safe than your own on-premise environment, because that's pretty vulnerable as well. And in some cases, it could be more secure because, hey, some of these organizations are better at security than you as, say, a mid-market supplier in some side market. So I think you'll have to start with that assumption if you're going out and selling into that enterprise base. In the consumer market, things proliferate faster, and you don't have to have that enterprise-grade capability. But a lot of our dialogue ends up being with those C-level execs at kind of that FTSE 250 and Fortune 250 level, and that's what they're going to start looking for as soon as you start having some of these attacks show up.
I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. Is there anybody? And while you're thinking about it, I'm going to ask another question. When we were talking about IoT, you were talking about verticals. What verticals are you really excited about? Where do you think there's an opportunity that's untapped and unmet so far?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity in transportation and logistics, and we have seen companies that are helping make the supply chain more visible. It's making the invisible visible by putting sensors and seeing, the movement of different kinds of vehicles, and that could be, freight trucks, 18-wheelers moving things around. But we also see things in more of the mundane, just manufacturing lines. And believe it or not, most manufacturing companies have basic, I wouldn't call them robots, but there's equipment building things, and there's a chip in there that can have Wi-Fi. And once you have that, you get the data, and we're seeing industrial IoT platforms that can really show that dollar ROI of coordinating, optimizing an assembly line. And that's kind of, in some sense, old tech, but it's got new life now with this visibility and optimization that IoT can bring.
Question?
I might be reading too much into what you were saying, but do you think that all the data has to go up into the cloud? Or is there kind of like maybe most of the data has to be processed locally, like kind of as you were hinting at it, before some metadata or selected data goes to the cloud? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a important filtering opportunity at the edge of the network where smaller sensors and processors and so on can say what's important to tell the cloud and not try to move all the data to the cloud. So I think that's going to be part of the new network topology, part of that replatforming of the enterprise stack because of IoT.
Any other questions? I think we're out of time.
All right.
Just bad news. The good news is there's drinks. Thank you very much.
Good news, drinks, the roof deck, and the view.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to wrap up now. Thank you, Miguel, for your panel moderation.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. From what I heard, it's 70 degrees upstairs, so I'll keep this very short. But first of all, I hope you all gained some insights today on the 1to100 conference. I think you heard it and we unpacked it for you in sales and marketing, partnerships, global, as well as M&A. I think we got, heard some very good feedback from a lot of the audience here. And those of you that are in startups, hopefully you learned something that can make your lives a little bit better. And I think that big picture is just like what Craig mentioned at the very beginning is, this goes beyond NextWorld Capital. This is something that we all think we can all be united behind to be able to help companies find their way to 100 million much, much faster and in a much better way. We look forward to continuing more events, more content, and more connections behind all of this. So thank you, attendees, for coming here. Thank you, speakers. And importantly, thank you to our sponsors who could help make this happen. So with that, drinks upstairs. Hope to see you soon.
All right, thanks, everybody. Thank you.